Today we're going to be talking about how professional cinematographers expose for shots that look like this. It's all about preserving the highlights by understanding the dynamic range of your specific camera. And by knowing the limits of your camera's sensor, it'll help you decide which strength of neutral density to use when exposing for scenes that involve windows and unevenly lit situations. So about a month ago over on the Dog Times Patreon, I did a full hour-long tutorial on this, and I think it was a revelation for a few members in our group. So I wanted to do a brief overview version of it here on YouTube, and hopefully it'll help some of you out as well. Now, unfortunately, if your camera does not have the ability to record in RAW, this isn't really going to apply to you. Most of you already know that when it comes to shooting in RAW, certain settings like ISO, white balance, all of that stuff is essentially just metadata, which means you can change it later on in post. The only true way to tap into your camera's full potential and really take advantage of its entire dynamic range is by recording in RAW and understanding the exposure limits of your individual camera sensor. So step one is figuring out the dynamic range of your specific camera. So in the case of mine, the Pocket 4K, Blackmagic Design already have this handy little dynamic range graph chart available on their website and in the owner manual. So if you don't own either the Pocket 4K or the Pocket 6K, I'm sure you can find something similar to this in the manual or website for whatever camera you own. First thing you want to do is take a look at this chart and see which areas are giving us the most dynamic range for our specific setting. And today we're focusing on preserving the highlights. So I've set up this little location here where Marianne is sitting by this window and camera is inside facing her, looking through the big window behind her. Normally a shot like this isn't really ideal, but I can guarantee you will most definitely be faced with this situation multiple times in your own journey as a cinematographer. So if it's not a shot like this, then it'll be something where someone's standing at a front door or inside of a garage or at a booth at a diner. You get the point. So this is not something foreign, and you will need to know how to execute this. Now, for your inexperienced person or for someone that just straight up doesn't care, you would have a situation that looks more like this. So here you can see our windows are entirely clipped. All we exposed for here is our inside. Now that might be okay for real estate or like your live event wedding stuff, but in the case of narrative cinematography, if you ask me, blown out windows are not really ideal. Even in the case of something like the big feature film Knives Out, even though those windows may have appeared clipped, in reality, they're still within the safe zone. The point of what we're doing today is figuring out how to balance that exposure between both the outside and the inside worlds. We are going to do our best at preserving as much detail as we can outside of that window by embracing and understanding the dynamic range of our camera. So if we look here on the dynamic range chart for our Pocket 4K, Blackmagic Design have broken down where those 13 stops of dynamic range fall based on whatever ISO we're shooting on. And what we're looking for is how many stops we can go over middle gray or overexpose. And our highest number above the middle line happens to be a 5.3. So if we follow that 5.3 down to the bottom of the graph, we see that that is at 1000 ISO. So this means that when shooting on the Pocket 4K at 1000 ISO, we can go 5.3 stops over middle gray, and we will preserve all the detail in those 5 stops over. Now, I've already stated earlier that ISO is essentially just metadata. However, what we're trying to do is capture as much detail as we can on the day. So in my little scenario here, I've already decided that I want to shoot at an f2.8. So if I'm going off the idea that I'm lighting to key, meaning my key light inside is going to match the f-stop on my lens, then f2.8 is going to be my middle gray or my exposure line. That means that everything outside can be 5.3 stops over that f2.8, which is roughly just a tad over f16. The next step is something you can really only do if you have a light meter that can take an accurate spot reading, because we have to take a spot reading of our hottest level outside of that window. I use the Sekonic Lightmaster Pro with the additional spot meter attachment. Now, it's very important when you're taking your spot reading that you stand next to the camera so you're getting as accurate of a reading as possible. And when I did this, I got an f128. Now, one thing you're probably noticing here is that the light meter says 2000 ISO. And the reason for that is because I'm using a Metabones and the light meter doesn't know that. So the speed booster is actually giving us one full extra stop of light. So in order to get an accurate reading, you have to adjust your light meter, and one full stop over 1000 ISO is actually 2000 ISO. So now we know that the brightest spot outside is an f128. But because we know the dynamic range of our camera, and we know how far we can push our sensor over the middle gray, we know all we gotta do is get that 128 down to an f16. So if we know our f-stops, we know that f128 is 6 full stops over f16. So now we know we just need a 6-stop ND, otherwise known as a 1.8. We grab that out of the filter case, drop it in our matte box, and now we're good to go. So we went from having a shot that looks like this to something that looks like this. You can let me know down in the comments which shot you prefer and why. Like I said, this is just a very quick overview of this, and if you're confused by anything, then I highly recommend you check out the full tutorial over on the Dog Times Patreon. Hey, if you're a fan of the channel and like to support, there's a couple different ways you can do that. The first and easiest way is to just hit that subscribe button and be sure to hit the bell so you get the latest videos as soon as they're dropped. But if you want to go above and beyond that and be a part of a daily filmmaking conversation, then I invite you to join the Dog Times community over on Patreon. That is where once a week I release an exclusive members-only video breaking down projects, talking gear, and sharing real-world experiences as a DIY indie filmmaker in Los Angeles. But my favorite part about the Patreon is the conversations happening over on Discord. That is where you will be connected with like-minded filmmakers and have instant access to learning ways to improve your own skills so you feel more confident about working on set as a professional. So welcome to the Dog Times community, and I'll chat with you soon.